The city buzzed with its usual rhythm-honking cars, busy crosswalks, and voices lost in the crowd. On the 33rd floor of one of the tallest glass towers, Julian Wexler adjusted his cufflinks and took a sip of his black coffee. He was a billionaire before he turned 35. People called him the cold wolf of Wall Street, sharp, distant, always in control. His world was numbers, mergers, and deadlines. Feelings had no place in it. That morning, a meeting with investors was scheduled, but when Julian stepped out of his sleek silver car and headed toward the entrance, he saw her. A little girl sat by the lobby fountain, hugging a worn-out teddy bear. Her dress was too big, her shoes didn't match, and her sign was made of a torn cereal box. It read, "I don't want money, just a hug." People passed her like she was invisible. Julian frowned. Security looked unsure whether to move her or not. Something in him, something buried and long forgotten, made him stop. He crouched in front of her. "What's your name?" He asked. "Ella," she whispered, not looking up. "I'm 6. Where's your mum?" He asked again, softer. "She's inside," she said. "She works here, but she's sick. I thought maybe if I asked nicely, someone would help her. Not with money, just not feeling alone." Julian didn't have words for what he felt. A businessman to the bone, he'd been to courtrooms, boardrooms, and gala dinners, but none of them prepared him for this. She held up her arms slowly. "I give good hugs," she said, without thinking. He let her wrap her arms around his neck. She was small, warm, real. Something in his chest cracked open. He stood, holding her hand. "Let's go see your mom. Are you sure?" she asked. "Most people just walk away." "I'm not most people," Julian said, as they walked through the building. People stared. Assistants paused. Phones stopped ringing. Julian didn't care. He had Ella's hand in his. He found her mother on the 14th floor. Her name was Claire, a secretary, pale, sitting behind a desk, trying not to cough. Claire looked up and froze. "Ella," she gasped, "what are you?" Julian stepped forward. She was outside, holding a sign. "I thought I should see what this is about." Claire's eyes filled with panic and shame. "I didn't know," she slipped out. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Wexler. Please." Julian raised a hand. "Don't apologize. Are you okay?" Claire blinked. "I have stage 3 lymphoma," she said quietly, "but I can't stop working. I'm all she has." Julian looked at Ella, now sitting quietly on her mother's lap, playing with the teddy bear's ear. He turned to Claire. "You don't have to do this alone." She stared at him, confused. "I mean it," he added. "Give me a week. Let me help." He didn't know what came over him, but as Claire nodded through tears, and Ella smiled her missing tooth grin, he felt something unfamiliar rise in him. Maybe this was the one deal he'd never regret making. Julian Wexler didn't return to the boardroom that day. Instead, he found himself standing awkwardly in a hospital waiting room, holding 2 coffee cups, one black, one with extra cream and sugar, just like Claire had said she liked. Claire sat in a stiff plastic chair, her coat draped around her shoulders, looking small despite her pride. Ella was with a nurse in the children's playroom. The walls were painted with faded murals of smiling animals, but the air still carried the sterile scent of medicine and something heavier. Uncertainty. Julian held out the coffee. Claire hesitated, then took it with both hands. "Thanks. You didn't have to come, I know," he said simply. "But I wanted to." He sat beside her. Not across a negotiation table, not behind a desk. Just a man next to a woman facing something unfair and cruel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The television in the corner played a rerun of a cooking show, its volume low. Like it too, respected the silence of that place. Claire took a sip of the coffee and closed her eyes. It's been like this for months. I go to work, I come here. I go home, repeat. I try to stay strong for Ella. You're doing more than anyone should have to, Julian said. How long have you known? 6 months. They caught it late. I kept thinking I had time, but... She looked down. Bills piled up, rent got late. I was scared if I stopped working, Ella wouldn't have anything. Julian listened, not as a boss, not as a man who once saw vulnerability as weakness, but as someone learning, for the first time, that strength sometimes looked like a mother, in a hospital chair holding back tears for her child. She's amazing, Julian said quietly. Claire smiled. She's all heart, always has been. Julian looked at her. She reminds me of someone. Claire raised an eyebrow. Me, he nodded. And someone I think I used to be. Claire tilted her head. You're not who I thought you were, Mr. Wexler. Julian, he corrected. Just Julian. Outside the door, a nurse called Claire's name. She stood slowly, her shoulders tense. Julian instinctively reached to steady her elbow. I'll wait, he said. You really don't have to, she replied, though her eyes softened. I want to, he repeated. Claire nodded once and disappeared into the treatment room. Julian sat alone, hands clasped in his lap. He wasn't sure what he was doing here. His life had been scheduled to the second. He owned properties in 5 countries. He hadn't missed a single quarterly earnings call in 7 years. But now he was waiting while a woman he'd barely knew fought for her life, and her daughter waited with a teddy bear in a room too quiet for childhood. The hours passed slowly. He checked his phone only twice. Not because he was uninterested in work, but because nothing on those screens mattered more right now. When Claire finally returned, she looked pale, lips dry, hands shaking slightly as she held a plastic bottle of water. Julian stood. Are you okay? She nodded, clearly exhausted, just tired. Chemo days are always like this. I'll drive you home, Julian said. I can't ask you didn't. She looked at him for a long second, then nodded. The ride was silent. Ella dozed in the back seat, curled against the door, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. Julian glanced at Claire. She sat staring out the window, her face unreadable, but something in her posture had changed just slightly. Maybe it was the way she let her arm rest on the console between them, or the way she didn't flinch when he turned up the heat. When they reached her apartment, Julian helped carry her bag upstairs. It wasn't a dangerous neighborhood, but it wasn't a good one either. Peeling paint, broken elevator, an old man sleeping on the lobby couch. Claire hesitated at her door. This is our world. Julian looked around. You deserve better. Claire gave a small, tired smile. Most people say that, then disappear. Not most people. She unlocked the door. Inside was clean but sparse. A second-hand couch, a small kitchen, and the same faded butterfly drawings Ella had brought to the office. Claire turned. Thank you for everything. Julian looked at hurriedly, looked not as a charity case, not as a project, but as a woman fighting a quiet, brutal battle with every bit of dignity she had left. He took out a small envelope and placed it on the counter. What's that? Rent? For 6 months? Claire's breath caught. Julian, I can't, you can, he said gently. It's not pity, it's support. You need to focus on healing, not surviving. She swallowed. Why are you doing this? Julian paused. Because I want to remember how to be human again. Claire looked at him, then really looked. For the first time in years, Julian felt seen. She walked forward and wrapped her arms around him. Not for money, not for debt, just a hug, simple, true, and exactly what he needed. Julian had never used a frying pan in his life. He stood in Claire's tiny kitchen at 7 in the morning, squinting at the instructions on the back of the pancake mix box like it was a legal contract. Behind him, Ella giggled from the couch, her teddy bear dressed in a pink sock she'd turned into a dress. Are you sure it says 1 cup of milk? He asked over his shoulder. Ella nodded seriously. And don't forget the eggs. Mummy always uses 2. Julian cracked 1 egg. Immediately, half the shell dropped into the bowl. Oops. Ella laughed, legs kicking in the air. You're doing great, Daddy. He froze. She had called him that once before, back when he first held her hand. But this time it sounded natural, like she believed it now, like it had already become true. Julian looked over at her and smiled. You're my head chef, then. She hopped down from the couch and joined him at the counter. Her tiny fingers reached for the whisk, stirring the lumpy batter with enthusiasm. Flour dusted the edge of the stove, and a drop of milk landed on Julian's sleeve, but he didn't care. In fact, he felt something unfamiliar contentment. Claire entered the room just as Julian flipped a misshapen pancake onto a plate. She wore an oversized sweater and pajama pants. Her face still carried the tiredness of a long night, but her eyes brightened when she saw the scene. What's going on in here? She asked softly. Pancake emergency, Julian said. Ella was starving. Claire chuckled. I can see that. Did the kitchen survive? Barely. Julian stepped aside and let Claire sit with Ella. He served them both, then joined them at the small table by the window. They ate together, no phones, no distractions, just soft morning light and the quiet clinking of forks. It felt normal. More than that, it felt needed. After breakfast, Julian helped Claire wash dishes, though he was clumsy and got more water on himself than the plates. Claire laughed again, really laughed, and it felt like music in a room that had known too much silence. You could have just taken us out, she teased. Julian shrugged. I wanted to be here, in this. Claire looked at him thoughtfully. You're not who I expected, Julian. He met her eyes. I'm not sure I know who I am anymore, but I'm learning. She dried a mug and leaned back against the counter. You didn't have to stay. You don't owe us anything. I know, he said quietly. That's why I'm still here. A silence settled between them, not awkward, but full, as if something invisible had shifted. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. Julian cleared his throat. I was thinking, you shouldn't be walking to the hospital anymore. Let me arrange transportation. Or better, move you somewhere better. Safer, near the park, maybe. Claire opened her mouth to argue, but Julian held up a hand. I'm not trying to control anything, he said, but I want to help. For Ella, for you. Claire looked down. Do you ever get scared, Julian? He paused. I used to think I didn't, but now, yeah, a lot. She met his gaze. It's hard being strong all the time. You don't have to be, he said. Not with me. Claire blinked fast. Don't say things you don't mean. I've never meant anything more, he replied. Ella came running in, breaking. The moment, can we go to the park today? Please, please, please. Julian smiled. Only if you help clean the kitchen first. She gasped. You're a bossy dad. He winked. I'm just practicing. That afternoon, they walked together through a small neighborhood park. Ella chased pigeons and climbed the rusted slide, while Julian and Claire sat on a bench watching her dot. Claire held a thermos of tea in her lap. Julian leaned back, jacket open, hair tousled by the breeze. Neither spoke much, but it wasn't needed. The moment was enough. At one point, Ella ran up holding a flower she'd picked. For you, Mummy, and for you, Daddy. Julian took it gently. Thanks, love. Claire raised an eyebrow. You said it so easily. She says it even easier, Julian replied. And I'm not fighting it. Claire stared at the flower, then at Julian. You know this can't last forever. I know, he said. But while it does. She trailed off. Julian finished the thought. Let's live like it's ours. Later that evening, as the sky turned pink and golden, Claire tucked Ella into bed while Julian waited outside in the hallway. He heard soft lullabies and giggles, the kind that made the walls feel alive again. Claire stepped out quietly and leaned against the doorframe. She loves you, Julian nodded. She's easy to love. Claire looked at him, tired but glowing in the soft hallway light. Do you think love can grow in a place like this? In a situation like this? Julian didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the small cardboard sign she'd once held. I kept this, he said. Claire stared at it, eyes wide, because it reminded me of the first time I truly felt something in years. She swallowed. Hard, Julian? He stepped closer. I don't know what the future looks like. I don't have answers. But I know I want to be wherever you are. Claire didn't reply, but her eyes said it all. They stood there, hearts quiet but beating. A little closer, and somewhere behind the door, a little girl slept peacefully, dreaming of pancakes and parks and two people brave enough to try again. The rain came quietly, like a secret. It started as a light tapping against the glass and slowly became a soft rhythm that filled the apartment. Claire stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, watching water streak down like tiny rivers racing each other. The world outside was blurred and grey, but inside there was warmth. Julian stepped into the room, drying his hands on a dish towel. Still raining? He asked. Claire didn't turn. It hasn't stopped all day. He walked over and stood beside her. For a moment, neither said anything. They just listened to the quiet sound of the rain and the occasional hum of the heater, trying to keep the cold out. Does it remind you of anything? Claire asked softly. Julian nodded. My childhood. Rain meant my parents would be home late. Work never paused for storms. For me, she said, rain meant we had to unplug everything. My mum always said lightning could sneak in through the wires. Julian smiled faintly. That's oddly poetic. Claire turned to look at him. What about now? What does rain mean to you? He thought for a second. It means I get to stay in, with you and Ella. She looked down at her feet, then slowly lifted her eyes again. It still feels temporary, like this is a dream that'll end when the sun comes out. Julian stepped closer. Then let's not wait for the sun. Let's live in the rain. She didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. That was progress. In the kitchen, Ella sat at the table with crayons scattered around her, carefully drawing a picture. She had already gone through 3 sheets, each one brighter than the last. This one had 3 stick figures again, her, Claire and Julian. This time they were under an umbrella together. When Julian leaned over her shoulder, she pointed proudly. "That's you holding the umbrella so Mummy doesn't get wet." He felt something tighten in his chest. Claire came in next, hair tied up, a blanket wrapped over her shoulders. She looked pale again, tired. Julian noticed the weight in her. "Step, did you take your meds?" he asked gently. She nodded, but her hand trembled slightly when she poured herself a glass of water. He stepped forward, not saying anything, just steadying the cup for her. She looked up at him with grateful eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. The day passed slowly. They stayed in, played board games, and watched old cartoons. Julian read to Ella from a children's book he barely understood, but she laughed anyway more at his silly voices than the actual story at one point. Claire fell asleep on the couch, her head resting on Julian's shoulder. He didn't move. He just sat still, feeling her weight, her warmth, her quiet breaths. He had closed more business deals than he could count. He had bought companies, crushed competitors, and seen his name printed in Forbes and Business Insider. But nothing, not a single moment, had felt as meaningful as this one. That evening, Claire's cough returned. It wasn't violent, but it lingered. Julian helped her into bed and sat beside her, holding her hand while she tried to relax. "I hate this," she said between breaths. Feeling weak, being seen like this. "You're not weak," Julian said. "You're fighting harder than anyone I know." She turned her head. "But what if I lose?" He tightened his grip. "Then you won't lose alone." Tears gathered. In her eyes, "I never asked for you to stay." "I didn't wait for you to ask," he said. "I just did." She squeezed his hand back. After she fell asleep, Julian stepped into the hallway. The rain still whispered outside. He sat at the kitchen table with Ella's drawings, slowly smoothing them out, one by one. There was one of just him and Ella, holding hands, then one of Claire and Ella in a field of flowers, then one, his favorite, of all 3 of them, standing in front of what looked like a big house with a garden. Over the roof, Ella had drawn a heart. Julian stared at it for a long time. He didn't know what the future would hold. Claire's illness was unpredictable. Life had no guarantees. But in that moment, with rain tapping gently against the glass, with drawings scattered around him and a child's belief folded into every page, he made a silent vow. He wouldn't let this slip away. Not again. Not this time. Even if the world outside stayed grey, even if the storms kept coming, he would be here, holding the umbrella, keeping the warmth inside, because some things, some people were worth standing in the rain for. The days grew colder, but inside Claire's apartment, warmth lingered like candlelight. Each morning began with a small routine, Ella's laughter bouncing down the hall, the quiet clang of spoons in cereal bowls, and Julian learning awkwardly but earnestly how to live in the rhythm of someone else's world. He had started arriving early, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with flowers, always with the same quiet determination that he never spoke of, but which Claire saw in the way he folded her laundry or memorized Ella's favorite bedtime stories. On the morning of her 4th treatment in this new cycle, Claire awoke to find a small box on her nightstand. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with a soft silk ribbon the color of twilight. There was no card. She blinked slowly, still groggy, her limbs heavy from sleep and lingering exhaustion. Her fingers traced the knot, then untied it with care. Inside, she found a scarf, a new one made from delicate threads of wool and cashmere. hand-stitched in a pattern that reminded her of waves and winds. Its colors were muted but rich, like early evening skies. She ran her thumb along the stitching and whispered Julian. He didn't bring it up. He never mentioned it, never asked if she liked it. But he noticed she wore it every day after. That tied gently around her neck, sometimes pulled up to warm her chin when the air was too cold. That was Julian's way. He didn't declare things loudly. He didn't fill the air with promises. He gave gifts wrapped in silence, in moments that didn't demand attention, but always carried meaning. That night, Claire was sitting on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, sipping tea. Julian sat in the armchair, reading a picture book to Ella, who had curled up in his lap. "Why do rabbits live in burrows?" she asked halfway through the story. Julian paused. "Maybe because it keeps them safe." "Are we in a burrow?" she asked next. He looked over at Claire, who had stopped sipping her tea. "Maybe," he said gently. "But I think it's more than that. A burrow is a place to hide. This," he gestured around, "this is a place to be found." Ella smiled, satisfied, and leaned against his chest. "I like being found." Claire didn't speak, but her eyes didn't leave him for the rest of the night. Later, after Ella had been tucked into bed and the dishes were done, Julian lingered in the kitchen. Claire joined him, wrapping her arms around herself as she leaned against the counter. "I found the scarf," she said softly. "I hoped you would. It's beautiful," she added, voice catching. "It felt like a gift I didn't know I needed." Julian didn't look at her. He stared at the tiled wall behind the sink. "I wanted to give you something warm, something lasting." Claire stepped closer. "Why are you like this?" He turned. "Like what?" "Kind, gentle, present. You used to be this name in a headline. A man in a suit who never smiled. Now, you're here, every day." Julian didn't have an answer. Not one he could easily explain. So instead, he asked, "Do you remember when you told me this couldn't last?" Claire nodded. "I've thought about that, a lot. And I realized, nothing in life is guaranteed to last. But that doesn't mean it isn't real, or worth choosing." Again and again, Claire's throat tightened. "What if I break your heart?" Julian stepped closer. "Then I'll thank you for letting me have one to break." She laughed through the tears that gathered in her eyes. "Say the most impossible things. They don't feel impossible to me," he said. "Not when I'm with you." She reached for his hand. It felt so small inside his, but steady, real. And for a while, they just stood there. Two people who had once been strangers, now wrapped in silence and closeness. No grand speeches, no declarations, just the shared knowledge that something had changed again, softly and forever. The next morning, Ella woke up to find another gift, this one waiting at the breakfast table. It was a small wooden music box, painted by hand. When she turned the key, a gentle lullaby played, and a little metal ballerina spun in slow circles. She squealed in delight and immediately ran to Julian, who was pouring orange juice into mismatched glasses. "Did you make this?" she asked. "I had it made," he said, "but I picked the song." Ella listened to the tune again. "Why this one?" Julian knelt beside her. "Because your mum hummed it once when she thought no one was listening." Claire stood frozen, one hand on the back of a chair, the scarf still tied loosely around her neck. Ella hugged him tightly, then ran off to play. Claire looked at him, speechless. He rose, slowly. "I'm not trying to impress you." "I know," she said. "I'm just trying to show you I see you." All the versions of you. The tired one, the brave one, the one that hums lullabies in the dark. Claire didn't answer right away. She just reached up, brushed her fingers against his cheek, and let them linger there. Then she whispered, "I see you too," and it was enough. The first strand fell in the shower. Claire didn't notice it at first, not until it slid across her shoulder like a spider's thread. She paused, heart skipping, and looked down to see more tangled in the water swirling at her feet. It wasn't dramatic, not a clump, just a few soft strands, pale gold against the porcelain. She stood still, letting the water run down her back, suddenly unsure whether to finish washing her hair or to cry. In the mirror afterward, she stared at her reflection. Her skin was paler now. Her eyes looked tired. She brushed her hair slowly, gently, careful not to tug too hard. Every pass of the bristles brought a few more strands loose. She said nothing, not even when Julian knocked on the bathroom door and asked softly, "You okay?" "Just a minute," she replied. When she finally came out, her hair was damp and tied into a loose braid. She smiled. It didn't quite reach her eyes. That night, she didn't hum Ella to sleep. She just sat beside her daughter's bed, fingers curled around the edge of the mattress, as if anchoring herself there. Ella, sensing something, stayed quiet. She reached up and held Claire's hand, then closed her eyes. Julian watched from the hallway, his arms crossed tightly across his chest. The next morning, Claire sat in front of the mirror again. The braid she had tied the night before was now thin and uneven. She stared at it for a long time before finally untying it. Julian knocked softly and stepped inside. He held something in his hands, an old shoebox wrapped in brown paper. She turned toward him, her face blank. "What's that?" she asked. He placed it on her lap and sat beside her. "Something I want you to have." Inside the box were scarves. Dozens of them. Soft cotton, silk, wool of every fabric imaginable. All shades, all textures. Some bright, some quiet. Some patterned like starry skies. Others soft like watercolors. Claire's lips parted in disbelief. "I started collecting them after the first one," he said. "Every time I saw one that reminded me of you, I bought it. I thought, maybe one day you'd need them." She looked at him, her eyes brimming. "You did this, weeks ago." He nodded. "I hoped we'd have more days together. I still do." Her hands shook as she picked up a soft blue one with tiny stitched roses along the edges. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, very quietly, she said, "Will you help me?" Julian stood behind her, his reflection meeting hers in the mirror. He gently helped her tie the scarf around her head. He didn't flinch when he saw the thinning patches near her scalp. He didn't make it about beauty. He didn't call it brave. He just tied the knot with care and looked at her like nothing had changed. "Still you," he said. Claire closed her eyes, and for the first time in days, her breath didn't shake. Later that day, they went for a walk. Claire wore the scarf. Ella held both their hands, swinging between them, chattering about a drawing she wanted to make. The world looked the same: buses, sidewalks, dogs pulling at Leisha's butt inside Claire. Something was different. She was no longer hiding from the change. She was walking through it. That evening, Julian cooked dinner. He burned the rice. Claire teased him for it. Ella painted stars on the windows with washable markers. Laughter came in little bursts, like sunlight through clouds. But when night returned, Claire stood in front of the bathroom mirror again. She reached up and pulled the scarf free. She touched her scalp gently, then opened the drawer and took out a small pair of scissors. She sat on the closed toilet seat, one leg tucked under her, and slowly began to cut what remained, a little at a time, not with regret, but with ceremony. With purpose. Julian knocked. "You need anything?" She opened the door. He stood in the hallway, still in his rolled-up sleeves, hands in his pockets. She held out the scissors. "Will you finish?" He said nothing, just stepped forward and knelt beside her. He ran his fingers gently through what was left, then snipped away the rest with slow, steady hands. It wasn't clean, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest when he was. Done. Claire looked at herself again, her scalp smooth, her eyes dark and steady, her mouth set not in a frown, but something close to peace. Julian placed the scissors down. "You're still the most beautiful person I've ever known." She looked at him, even now, especially now. She leaned forward, rested her forehead against his, and whispered, "Thank you for not looking away." He whispered back, "There's nothing I'd rather look at." That night, Claire fell asleep, not with a scarf but in Julian's arms, bareheaded and unafraid. And when she awoke in the middle of the night to the sound of rain again, she didn't reach for a blanket. She reached for him. He was already awake, already holding her close. Neither said a word, because some of the most precious gifts come not with ribbons or boxes, but in silence. The sun had begun to return, not just outside, where soft spring light crept in through the kitchen blinds, but inside their lives too. A slow, golden warmth that came after long months of quiet storms. Claire stood in the kitchen in her soft robe, her hands cupped around a warm mug of chamomile tea. The scarf on her head today was deep green with little white stars, one of the ones Julian had found weeks ago. It didn't feel like hiding anymore. It felt like choosing how to be seen. Julian was at the stove, making his now famous pancakes, Ella watching him with wide eyes and a fork already in hand. She was humming something under her breath, her feet swinging from her chair. Claire smiled. This was what she hadn't dared to dream of. Not riches, not cures, just mornings like this. After breakfast, Ella reached for something in her little pink art folder. "Close your eyes." She, Squeal. That they obeyed. "Okay, open." She held up a drawing. It was a house simple and boxy, drawn with thick crayon lines. A sun peeked from the corner of the page, and little red hearts floated above the roof. But what stole their breath was what stood in front of the house. 3 stick figures, one tall, with glasses, one with a scarf, one small, wearing a crown. Over their heads were names written in crooked letters. Mummy, Daddy, me. Claire pressed her hand to her mouth. Julian just stared, blinking hard. Ella beamed. "I made it for the fridge." Julian walked over and, without a word, found a magnet and gently placed the drawing on the refrigerator door like it was a priceless painting. Then he crouched in front of Ella. "Thank you." She wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "I told you you were the best one." That afternoon, Claire and Julian sat on the back porch of their new place. It wasn't a mansion. It didn't have a pool or sweeping marble staircases. But it had a garden. It had sunlight. It had peace. Claire leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we'll always have this?" she asked quietly. Julian looked out at the garden. "I don't know what tomorrow looks like," he said, "but I know that I will choose this." "Choose you," every single day. She turned to face him. Even if I lose my fight, he didn't flinch. Then I will be there to hold your hand all the way through it. But I won't stop fighting either. Not for you, not for Ella, not for us. Claire closed her eyes. I didn't think love like this was real. Julian smiled. It's not perfect, but it's real. A few weeks later, Claire's scan came back clear. The doctor smiled, nodded gently, and said, "Let's stay on top of it." But this is good news. Claire cried then. Not the quiet, graceful kind of tears she was used to holding in, but loud, relieved, grateful sobs. Julian held her in the middle of the doctor's office, his own eyes wet. Ella cheered like they'd won a gold medal. That night, they lit candles at dinner. Not because it was a special occasion, but because now, every evening felt like one. They had made it through the storm, not untouched, not unchanged. But together, a few months later, they held a small wedding. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't on the cover of a magazine, but it had everything that mattered. Claire, smiling wide, wearing the green scarf she now called her courage crown. Julian, looking stunned and proud all at once. And Ella, skipping down the aisle, tossing wildflowers, singing, "This is the best day ever." Their vows weren't rehearsed. Claire simply said, "You didn't save me. You stood beside me while I saved myself, and I love you for that." Julian said, "You made me human again, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring that gift." When they kissed, Ella clapped so hard the flowers fell from her basket. And when they went home that evening, home, not to an apartment or an estate, but to their small, sacred space, they stopped at the fridge. The drawing was still there, faded from sunlight, a little wrinkled from steam, but still holding 3 names: Mummy, Daddy, me. Claire smiled, reached for a pen, and carefully added one more thing beneath the drawing. A date. The day their story began. Not the day they met, not the day they survived, but the day they became a family. Together they had rewritten what love could mean. Not perfection, not fairy tales, but presence, courage, and the kind of kindness that rebuilds a broken world, one quiet morning at a time. And as the seasons passed, that drawing remained on the fridge, a reminder that love, when chosen every day, doesn't have to be loud to last forever.